I stood outside for an hour, rain soaking through my jacket, through my shirt, down to my skin. The porch light was on. I could hear voices inside, laughter, music from the television. No one came to the door. I knocked twice in the first 10 minutes. Then I stopped. What was the point? They knew I was out here. Rachel had seen me through the kitchen window when I walked up the driveway. Our eyes met for exactly 3 seconds before she turned away and said something to Marcus, something that made him chuckle. The rain got heavier. October rain, the kind that cuts through you. I pulled my jacket tighter, but it didn't help much. The fabric was thin. Eleanor used to tell me to buy a proper coat, something that would last. "Harold," she'd say, "you can't keep wearing that old thing forever." But Eleanor's been gone 2 years now, and the old thing was all I had left of the man I used to be. Through the window, I watched my daughter move around the kitchen I built 30 years ago, the cabinets I installed myself, measuring each cut twice because Eleanor wouldn't tolerate crooked doors. The island where we used to eat breakfast together before Rachel was born. She was unpacking grocery bags now, filling the refrigerator like she owned the place, which I suppose she thought she did. Marcus appeared beside her, opened a beer, and said something that made her laugh again. They looked comfortable, settled, like they belonged there more than I ever had. I thought about knocking again. I thought about walking away. Instead, I reached into my jacket pocket and felt for the weight of the key, the old key, the one they didn't know about because they'd never bothered to ask if there were others. My fingers closed around the metal, and for the first time in months, I smiled. They'd made a mistake. Not tonight, not with the rain, not with leaving me outside like some stranger who'd wandered onto their property. The mistake was older than that, deeper. They'd forgotten who built this house, who paid for every brick, every board, every nail that held it together. They'd forgotten that before I was the quiet old man they pushed into the back bedroom, I was Harold Whitman, and Harold Whitman always kept a spare key. But more than that, Harold Whitman always had a plan. I stood there another 10 minutes, letting the rain wash over me, letting them think they'd won something. Inside, the laughter continued. The television played. Life went on without me, just like it had been going on for the past 8 months since they'd moved in to help with the house. Help. That's what Rachel had called it when she first suggested it. "Dad, you can't manage this big place alone anymore. Let us help." What she meant was, let us take it. What she didn't know was that I'd been expecting this day for longer than she realized. Much longer. I pulled out the key and looked at it one last time in the dim porch light. Small, silver, worn smooth from decades of use. Eleanor had carried one just like it in her purse until the day she died. For emergencies, she'd always said. Well, Eleanor, this felt like an emergency. I walked around to the back of the house, to the door that led into the mudroom, the door they never used because it opened onto the part of the house they'd claimed didn't matter. The old part. The part where I kept my tools and my memories and the things they thought had no value. The key turned easily. It always had. I stepped inside, shook the rain from my jacket, and listened. They were in the living room now. I could hear the television clearly, some comedy show with a laugh track. Rachel was saying something about paint colors for the guest bathroom. My bathroom. The one Eleanor had decorated with seashells from our trip to Cape Cod. I stood in the mudroom for a long time, just listening, just remembering, just planning. Tomorrow, I would make some phone calls. Tonight, I would dry off and think about what came next. But first, I would do something they weren't expecting. I would stay quiet. I could have gone upstairs then, back to the small room they'd given me, with the single bed and the window that faced the neighbor's fence. The room that used to be Rachel's when she was 16 and thought the world revolved around her diary and her phone calls with friends who didn't matter. But I didn't go upstairs. Instead, I sat down at the kitchen table. My kitchen table. The one Eleanor and I had bought at an estate sale in 1987 because we couldn't afford new furniture and didn't care as long as it was solid wood. The chairs creaked under my weight. Everything in this house creaked now like it was getting old along with me. But unlike me, the house was still strong, still mine. I could hear them clearly from here. Rachel was talking about the bathroom again, about how the seashell wallpaper was dated and needed to go. Marcus agreed, of course. Marcus always agreed with Rachel, especially when it came to changing things that reminded me of Eleanor. We could gut the whole thing, he was saying. Start fresh. Make it modern. The resale value would be so much better, Rachel replied. Resale value? There it was. The truth they thought I couldn't hear. I opened the refrigerator and looked inside. My beer was gone. The sandwich meat I'd bought yesterday was gone. Even the leftover soup Eleanor used to make, the recipe she'd written on a card that was now water-stained and yellow with age, was gone. In its place were organic vegetables I didn't recognize and Greek yogurt that cost more per container than I used to spend on groceries for a week. They'd erased me from my own refrigerator. I closed the door and sat back down. The house felt different at night, heavier, full of memories that pressed against the walls like trapped air. During the day, when Rachel was at work and Marcus was doing whatever Marcus did, I still wasn't entirely sure what that was. I could pretend things were normal. I could walk through the rooms and remember when they were mine. But at night, when they were home, when they filled the space with their voices and their plans and their casual assumptions about my future, the house felt smaller, like it was shrinking around me. I heard footsteps on the stairs, heavy ones. Marcus. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, stopped when he saw me sitting there. For a moment, neither of us said anything. He was holding his phone, probably scrolling through whatever it is 39-year-old men scroll through at 11 o'clock at night. "Hey, Harold," he said, like we were neighbors who'd run into each other at the mailbox. "Didn't hear you come in." "Back door," I said. He nodded, opened the refrigerator, grabbed another beer. Didn't offer me one. Didn't ask how long I'd been standing in the rain. Didn't apologize for not answering the door. "Rachel's upstairs," he said, "making some calls about contractors." Contractors for my bathroom. "I see," I said. Marcus leaned against the counter, studying me like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "You know, Harold, we've been talking about the future, about what makes sense." I waited. "This house is a lot for one person to maintain. Even with us here to help, it's a big responsibility." I nodded. "It is. We just want what's best for everyone. For you especially." Of course they did. "Rachel found this place," he continued, "about 20 minutes from here. Nice community. People your age, activities, meals included. You wouldn't have to worry about anything. Assisted living, I said. Well, yeah, but it's not like what you're thinking. It's more like a community with support. I looked at him for a long time, really looked at him. Marcus had been married to my daughter for 3 years, and in all that time, I'd never once heard him say anything that wasn't calculated. Everything that came out of his mouth was designed to get him something he wanted. Right now, he wanted my house. When? I asked. When what? When do I need to decide? He shifted uncomfortably. Well, there's no rush. We just think sooner might be better than later for everyone. I see. Marcus finished his beer, threw the bottle in the recycling bin I'd been using for 15 years, and headed back toward the stairs. At the doorway, he turned around. Harold? Yes? You should think about it. Really think about it. Rachel's worried about you. After he was gone, I sat in the dark for another hour. The house settled around me, making the small sounds old houses make. The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the wall ticked. Somewhere upstairs, I could hear Rachel's voice, muffled but persistent, talking to someone on the phone, probably calling that contractor, or maybe calling the assisted living place to ask about availability. I thought about Eleanor, about what she would say if she could see what was happening. She'd always been protective of this house, of the life we'd built inside these walls. Harold, she used to say, a house isn't just wood and nails. It's every conversation, every meal, every night we've spent here together. But Eleanor was gone, and conversations don't pay property taxes. I stood up, turned off the kitchen light, and walked toward the stairs. At the bottom step, I stopped and looked back at the kitchen one more time. Tomorrow, I would start making those phone calls I'd been thinking about. Tonight, I would remember what it felt like to be Harold Whitman. And tomorrow, I would remind everyone else. I woke up before dawn, like I had every morning for the past 40 years. The house was quiet, too quiet. Even when Eleanor was alive, there were sounds, coffee brewing, her slippers on the kitchen floor, the soft murmur of morning radio. Now there was nothing except the heating system cycling on and off, and the occasional creak of settling wood. I dressed in the same clothes I'd worn yesterday. They still smelled like rain. Downstairs, I made coffee in the machine Eleanor had insisted we needed back when French press seemed like all the sophistication we could handle. Rachel had tried to replace it twice since moving in, claiming it was taking up counter space. Both times, I'd unplugged her new machine and put it in the basement. Some battles you fight quietly. At 6:30, I heard movement upstairs. The shower running. Rachel getting ready for work. Marcus would sleep until 8, then spend an hour on his laptop doing whatever it was that made him money without requiring him to leave the house. I took my coffee to the living room and sat in the chair that used to be mine. The chair they'd moved to faced the corner because it didn't match the new arrangement. From here, I could see the driveway and the street beyond it. Mrs. Fletcher across the way was already retrieving her newspaper, moving carefully on the wet pavement. George was loading his truck for another day of actual work. Real work. The kind that left dirt under your fingernails and made you tired in a way that meant something. At 7:15, Rachel came downstairs in her business clothes and expensive shoes that clicked against the hardwood floors I'd refinished myself in 1995. She moved through the kitchen like she was performing a routine she'd practiced. Coffee mug from the cabinet, cream from the refrigerator, 2 packets of artificial sweetener from the drawer that used to hold Eleanor's recipe cards. She didn't see me sitting there, or maybe she did and chose not to acknowledge it. Either way, she was gone by 7:30, backing her car out of the driveway without once looking toward the living room window. That's when I made the first call. Victoria Hayes answered on the second ring. "Mr. Whitman, good morning. It's been a while." "Yes, it has." "Victoria, I need to access my deposit box today. Would that be possible?" "Of course. Should I expect you this morning?" "Within the hour." There was a pause. Victoria had been handling my banking for 12 years, since before Eleanor got sick, since before I'd made the decision to step back from the business and let other people think I was just another retiree living on Social Security and whatever savings they imagined I had left. "Mr. Whitman, is everything all right?" "Everything's fine, Victoria. I just need to review some old documents." "I'll have everything ready for you." The second call took longer to make. I sat with the phone in my hand for 10 minutes, staring at the number I'd written on a piece of paper and kept in my wallet for 2 years. Finally, I dialed. "Morrison, Blackwell and Associates. I'd like to speak with Theodore Blackwell, please." "May I ask who's calling?" "Harold Whitman. Tell him it's about the Sinclair case." The Sinclair case. That would get his attention. Ted Blackwell had handled my business affairs for 15 years, had seen me through the sale of my construction company, through Eleanor's medical bills, through the complicated process of arranging my finances in a way that would protect what I'd built while appearing to be much simpler than it actually was. Ted came on the line within 30 seconds. "Harold, Jesus, it's good to hear your voice. How long has it been?" "Too long, Ted. I need to see you. Today, if possible." "Of course. Are you all right? You sound—" "I'm fine, but I think it's time to implement what we discussed, the arrangements we made." Another pause. Ted was a careful man, careful with words, careful with assumptions. "All of them?" "All of them. I can be in my office by noon. Will that work?" "It'll work perfectly." By 8:30, Marcus was awake, moving around upstairs like a man who had nowhere urgent to be. I heard the shower again, heard him talking on the phone to someone about a deal that was almost ready to close. Marcus was always almost closing deals that never seemed to result in any actual income, at least none that I could identify. But that was about to become his problem, not mine. I finished my coffee, washed the mug in the sink, and left it in the dish drainer exactly where Eleanor had always left hers. Then I went upstairs to my room, the small room, the room that had been Rachel's, and opened the closet. Behind my hanging shirts, pushed against the back wall where no one would think to look, was a briefcase, black leather, combination lock, worn at the corners from years of use. I pulled it out and set it on the bed. Inside were documents Rachel and Marcus had never seen, documents they didn't know existed. Property deeds, trust agreements, bank statements, insurance policies. The paperwork of a life they'd never bothered to ask about because they'd assumed there was nothing worth asking about. They'd seen an old man in an old house with old furniture and an old car, and they'd made the mistake of thinking that was all there was to see. But Harold Whitman had spent 40 years building things, houses, businesses, relationships, financial structures that could weather storms they couldn't even imagine. And Harold Whitman had learned something important during those 40 years. The people who underestimate you are giving you the greatest gift they possibly can. They're giving you the element of surprise. I closed the briefcase, checked the combination lock, and carried it downstairs. Marcus was in the kitchen now, making breakfast from food I hadn't bought with money I hadn't contributed to the household budget they'd created without consulting me. "Morning, Harold," he said, not looking up from his phone. "Rachel said you were up early." "Every morning," I said. "Right. Well, she also said she wants to talk tonight about those places we looked at, the communities." "I'm sure she does." Marcus finally looked at me, noticed the briefcase in my hand. "Going somewhere?" "Bank," I said. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine." I left him standing in the kitchen, probably wondering what business an old man might have at a bank that required a briefcase. Let him wonder. He'd find out soon enough. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray, heavy with clouds that looked like they were holding back something bigger. I put the briefcase in the passenger seat of my old Honda, the car Rachel kept saying I should replace with something more reliable, and drove toward town. At the first red light, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw my house getting smaller behind me. The house Rachel and Marcus thought they were inheriting. The house they'd already started planning to sell. By tonight, they would understand how wrong they'd been about almost everything. But first, I had some old debts to call in and some new arrangements to make. Ted Blackwell was going to earn his fee today. The bank was exactly as I remembered it. Marble floors that echoed footsteps, teller windows that had been updated twice since I'd opened my first account here in 1982, and the same smell of old money and careful decisions. Victoria Hayes met me at the customer service desk, her smile genuine in the way that comes from years of professional relationship built on mutual respect. "Mr. Whitman, it's wonderful to see you." "You too, Victoria. You look well." "Thank you. Right this way." She led me through the familiar ritual: identification, signature verification, the walk down the corridor to the vault where safe deposit boxes lined the walls like small secrets waiting to be revealed. Box 247. I'd rented it the same year Eleanor was diagnosed, when I'd realized that some preparations need to be made quietly, away from the eyes of people who might not understand their necessity. Victoria inserted her key, waited while I inserted mine, and stepped back to give me privacy. "Take all the time you need, Mr. Whitman. I'll be at my desk when you're finished." The box was heavier than I remembered. Inside were documents that told a different story than the one Rachel and Marcus thought they knew. The story of Harold Whitman, who had sold his construction company in 2019, not because he was tired, not because he was ready to retire, but because a private equity firm had made him an offer that was too strategic to refuse. The story of a man who had taken that money and invested it carefully, quietly, through a series of trusts and LLCs that kept his name off public records while generating income that far exceeded what most people his age could expect from Social Security. Security and a pension. The story of someone who had learned, through 40 years of building other people's dreams, that the most important foundation you can lay is the one no one else can see. I spread the papers across the small table in the vault room, bank statements showing balances that would surprise anyone who thought I was living paycheck to paycheck, trust documents establishing legal structures that protected assets while maintaining control, and most importantly, the property deed to 1247 Elm Street, the house Rachel and Marcus thought they understood, the house that was mine, legally and completely, in ways they had never bothered to investigate. The deed was clear. No joint ownership with Rachel, no survivorship rights that would automatically transfer the property upon my death, no liens, no mortgages, no encumbrances that would give anyone else a claim to what I had built. Just Harold Whitman, sole owner, with the absolute right to dispose of the property as he saw fit. I photographed each document with my phone, uploaded them to a secure cloud account Ted Blackwell had set up for me years ago, then carefully returned everything to the box. Everything except one folder. The folder I would need for my appointment at noon. Victoria was waiting when I emerged from the vault, her expression carefully neutral in the way of people who have seen enough financial situations to know that money rarely tells the whole story. Everything in order, Mr. Whitman? Perfectly in order, Victoria. Thank you. Is there anything else I can help you with today? I paused at her desk, looked around the bank lobby where I'd conducted business for over 30 years, where I'd deposited my first paycheck as an independent contractor, where Eleanor and I had applied for our mortgage back when interest rates were higher and dreams were simpler. Victoria, do you remember when I first came here? 1982. She smiled. I was just a teller then. You were starting your business, if I recall correctly. That's right. You helped me open my business account. Do you remember what I told you that day? She thought for a moment. You said you intended to build something that would last. That's right. Something that would last. I left the bank with the folder under my arm and drove across town to the office building where Ted Blackwell had practiced law since before Rachel was born. The building was older than the bank, brick and mortar, from an era when people built things to stand for centuries, not decades. Ted was waiting in his office, a man in his 60s who had aged better than I had, probably because he'd spent less time in the sun and more time behind a desk reviewing contracts that other people would have to live with. Harold, he said, standing to shake my hand, sit down. Tell me what's happening. I sat in the leather chair across from his desk and opened the folder I'd brought from the bank. It's time, Ted. Everything we discussed, everything we planned for. Ted leaned back in his chair, studying my face with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read between the lines of what his clients were actually saying. The living trust? All of it. The property transfer mechanisms? All of it. Harold, are you sure? Once we implement these arrangements, they're not easily reversed. I looked out the window of his office, down at the street where people were going about their daily business, unaware that their lives could change completely based on decisions made in rooms like this one by people they would never meet. Ted, do you have children? 2 daughters? Do you trust them? He was quiet for a moment. I love them. That's not what I asked. I trust them to be human, Harold, which means I trust them to make mistakes, to act in their own interest, to sometimes disappoint me. That's why I have a will. That's why I have insurance. That's why I've made arrangements that don't depend on their judgment or their gratitude. Exactly. I pulled out the documents I'd photographed at the bank, the legal structures we'd created years ago when I still thought I might never need them. Rachel and Marcus think I'm a burden they're managing until I die. They think this house is an inheritance they're waiting to collect. They think I'm an old man who doesn't understand how the world works anymore. And they're wrong. They're wrong about everything that matters. Ted opened his laptop, pulled up files that had been waiting in digital storage for exactly this conversation. The irrevocable trust we established, that puts the property beyond their reach while allowing you to retain lifetime occupancy rights. Yes, the financial structures that ensure your care without depleting the estate they expect to inherit. Yes, the charitable foundation that will receive the bulk of your assets, with provisions for family members who demonstrate genuine care and respect. I thought about Rachel bringing me tea last night in a future that hadn't happened yet, about the possibility of redemption that every parent hopes for, even when experience suggests hope might be misplaced. Yes, but with the modifications we discussed, the opportunity for them to earn back what they're about to lose. Ted was typing now, accessing legal documents that would reshape my family's understanding of their own future. This is going to be a shock, Harold. Are you prepared for their reaction? I've been preparing for it for 2 years. They'll fight it. Let them fight. They'll discover that I learned something important during 40 years of construction work. What's that? Before you start building, you make sure you have a solid foundation. And before you make major changes to a structure, you make sure you understand what's actually holding it up. Ted smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him all morning. When do you want to implement this? Today, this afternoon. I want them to understand their situation before they make any more plans about my future. I'll need 2 hours to prepare everything. I'll be home by 3. Can you meet me there at 4? With pleasure, Harold. With absolute pleasure. I drove home slowly, taking the long route through the neighborhoods where I'd built houses for young families who were now grandparents themselves. Houses that were still standing, still sheltering the dreams of people who understood that a home is more than an investment opportunity. At every red light, I thought about what Rachel and Marcus were doing right now. Rachel at her office, probably making more calls about contractors and paint colors. Marcus at home, probably researching assisted living facilities and calculating what the house might sell for in the current market. They were planning my future without me. Tonight, I would return the favor. But first, I had one more stop to make, one more person to call, someone who deserved to know what was coming, someone who had earned the right to understand why I was doing what I was about to do. I pulled into the parking lot of Elmwood Cemetery and walked to the grave that had become my most frequent destination over the past 2 years. "Hello, Eleanor," I said, kneeling to place fresh flowers on the stone that marked the end of 38 years of marriage and the beginning of whatever came next. "It's time," I told her, "time to finish what we started." The wind moved through the trees overhead, and for just a moment I could swear I heard her voice. About time, Harold. About damn time. I drove home with the folder of documents on the passenger seat and 30 years of careful planning finally ready to unfold. The house looked different when I pulled into the driveway. Smaller, somehow, like seeing it through the eyes of someone who no longer had to pretend it was slipping away from him. Marcus's car was in the same spot where he'd left it that morning. Through the kitchen window, I could see him moving around, probably making lunch with food he hadn't bought in a house he didn't own. That was about to change. I sat in the car for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled, watching Mrs. Fletcher work in her garden across the street. She looked up and waved, the same neighborly gesture she'd made every day for 15 years. Some things, at least, remained constant. At exactly 4 o'clock, Ted Blackwell's silver BMW pulled up behind my Honda. He stepped out carrying a leather briefcase that matched mine, his expression serious in the way of attorneys who are about to deliver news that will change everything. "Harold," he said as we met on the front porch, "are you ready for this? I've been ready for 2 years. Once I explain the legal situation to them, there's no pretending this was a misunderstanding. They'll know exactly where things stand." "Good. I'm tired of pretending." We walked to the front door, the same door I'd stood outside of in the rain 12 hours earlier. This time, I used my key. My house, my key, my rules. Marcus was in the living room, feet up on the coffee table Eleanor and I had bought at an antique store in Vermont during our 20th anniversary trip. He looked up when Ted and I entered, his expression shifting from casual indifference to something approaching concern when he saw the man in the expensive suit carrying legal documents. "Harold," Marcus said, muting the television. "I wasn't expecting company." "Marcus, this is Theodore Blackwell. He's my attorney. Ted, this is Marcus Carter, my daughter's husband." Ted stepped forward, extending his hand with the professional courtesy that comes before delivering bad news. "Mr. Carter, pleased to meet you." Marcus shook his hand, but his eyes were fixed on me. "Attorney?" "Harold, is everything all right? Are you sick?" "I'm fine, Marcus. Better than I've been in months, actually." "Is Rachel on her way home?" "She should be here any minute. She said she had news about the contractor." "Excellent. We'll wait for her." I sat down in my chair, the chair they'd moved to face the corner, and turned it back toward the center of the room. Ted took a seat on the couch, opened his briefcase, and arranged documents on the coffee table with the methodical precision of someone who had performed this ritual many times before. Marcus remained standing, his phone in his hand like he was considering calling someone, but wasn't sure who. "Harold, what's going on here?" "We're going to have a family meeting, Marcus. The kind we should have had 8 months ago when you and Rachel first moved in." At 4:15, Rachel's car pulled into the driveway. I heard her heels on the front walk, heard her key in the lock, heard her calling out as she entered. "Marcus, I got the estimate from the contractor. We can start on the bathroom next week if we—" She stopped when she saw Ted Blackwell sitting in her living room with legal documents spread across her coffee table. "Dad, what's happening? Who is this?" "Rachel, sit down. This is Theodore Blackwell, my attorney. Ted, my daughter Rachel." Rachel remained standing, her purse clutched in both hands like a shield. "Attorney? Dad, what's wrong? Are you in some kind of trouble?" "No trouble, Rachel, but we need to talk about some things. Some misunderstandings that need to be cleared up." Marcus moved closer to his wife, and I watched them exchange the kind of look that passes between people who share secrets they don't want discovered. "What kind of misunderstandings?" Rachel asked. Ted cleared his throat, the sound lawyers make when they're about to deliver information that will be unwelcome but legally unassailable. Ms. Carter, your father has asked me to clarify the ownership and legal status of this property, as well as his financial arrangements and estate planning decisions. I don't understand, she said, but her voice suggested she was beginning to understand. Perfectly. Let me be specific, Ted continued, lifting the first document from the coffee table. This property, 1247 Elm Street, is owned solely by Harold Whitman. There are no joint ownership arrangements, no automatic transfer provisions, and no encumbrances that would give anyone else legal claim to the property. Rachel looked at Marcus, then at me. Dad, of course the house is yours. We never said it wasn't. No, I said quietly, but you've been making plans as if it would be yours. Plans that assume I won't be here much longer. Marcus stepped forward. Harold, I think there's been some confusion. We were only trying to help. Help by researching assisted living facilities. Silence. Help by getting estimates on renovations I never approved. More silence. Help by discussing the resale value of my home. Rachel's face went pale. Dad, how did you... We were just thinking ahead, planning for the future. Whose future, Rachel? Ted lifted another document. Your father has also asked me to explain the financial structures he's established, structures that ensure his care and comfort while protecting his assets from premature distribution. What does that mean? Marcus demanded. It means, Ted said, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a verdict, that the assumptions you may have made about Mr. Whitman's financial situation are incorrect, significantly incorrect. I watched my daughter's face as she began to understand that the old man she'd been managing was not the old man she thought she knew. Furthermore, Ted continued, Mr. Whitman has today executed an irrevocable trust that places this property beyond the reach of anyone who might attempt to claim it through inheritance, marriage, or any other legal mechanism. What? Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. The house will remain his to live in for the rest of his life. Upon his death, it will pass to a charitable foundation he's established, with provisions for family members who demonstrate genuine care and respect for his wishes. Marcus was staring at me like I was a stranger who had walked into his living room and announced I was moving in. You can't do this, he said. Actually, Ted replied, he can. He has, and it's completely legal. Rachel sank into a chair, her face cycling through emotions I hadn't seen since she was a teenager, caught in a lie that was bigger than she could manage. Dad, I don't understand. Why would you do this? We love you. We moved in here to take care of you. Did you, Rachel? Of course we did. Then explain the conversation you and Marcus had last night about when the old man would finally sign papers that would make your lives easier. The color drained from both their faces. You were listening, Marcus said. I was standing in the rain for an hour outside my own house, Marcus. Yes, I was listening. Rachel started to speak, but I held up my hand. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady in a way it hadn't been for months. You have two choices. You can accept that this is my house, respect my decisions about my own life, and build a relationship with me based on honesty instead of inheritance expectations. Or, Marcus asked, or you can find somewhere else to live tonight. Ted gathered his documents, closed his briefcase, and stood. "I think my work here is finished. Harold, you have my number if you need anything else." After he left, the three of us sat in silence for a long time. Outside, I could hear Mrs. Fletcher's dog barking, the sound of George's truck returning from another day of honest work, the ordinary sounds of a neighborhood where people knew who they were and where they belonged. Finally, Rachel spoke. "Dad, I'm sorry. We never meant—" "What you meant," I said, "is that you thought I was helpless, thought I was a burden you had to manage until I died, and left you something valuable enough to make the inconvenience worthwhile." "That's not true, isn't it?" Marcus was staring at the floor, probably calculating how much money he thought he'd lost in the space of an hour. "Here's what's true," I continued. "I built this house with my own hands. I paid for it with money I earned doing work that mattered. I filled it with memories that belong to me and Eleanor, not to people who see it as an investment opportunity." I stood up, walked to the window that looked out over the backyard where Eleanor had planted rose bushes that still bloomed every spring. But I also believe in second chances. I believe people can change, can learn to value things that aren't measured in dollars. Rachel looked up at me, and for just a moment I saw the little girl who used to help me in the workshop, who used to ask 1,000 questions about how things were built and why they lasted. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Now," I said, "you decide what kind of people you want to be, and I decide whether the daughter I raised is still in there somewhere, underneath all the plans and calculations and assumptions about what you deserve from my life." The next morning, I woke up in my own house, in the chair that faced the center of the room, with sunlight streaming through windows that looked out on a future I had chosen for myself. For the first time in 8 months, I was home. Rachel brought me tea the next morning, real tea in the cup Eleanor used to favor, the one with the small chip on the handle that made it imperfect and somehow more precious because of it. She set it on the table beside my chair without saying anything, then sat down across from me in the spot where Marcus usually planted himself with his phone and his casual assumptions about other people's lives. "Dad," she said quietly, "I've been thinking all night." I sipped the tea. It was perfect, hot enough, strong enough, made with the attention that comes when someone actually cares about the result. "Marcus left this morning," she continued. "He's staying at his brother's place while he figures things out." I nodded. I'd heard his car start before dawn, heard him loading suitcases with the angry efficiency of someone who had been forced to acknowledge an uncomfortable truth about himself. "He said you humiliated him." "Did I?" "No," Rachel said, and her voice was different than it had been yesterday, quieter, more honest. "He humiliated himself. We both did." Outside, Mrs. Fletcher was tending her garden again, the same ritual of care and attention she'd maintained for 15 years. Some people understood that valuable things required daily commitment, not grand gestures or strategic plans. "I don't remember when I stopped seeing you as my father and started seeing you as a problem to solve," Rachel said. "But somewhere along the way, that's what happened, and I'm sorry." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She had Eleanor's eyes, the same combination of strength and vulnerability that had made me fall in love with her mother 39 years ago. "When you were 8, I said, "you wanted to help me build a birdhouse." Do you remember? Rachel's face softened. You let me hold the nails. You were so careful with each one, counted them twice before handing them to me, asked why we needed to measure everything when we could just eyeball it. And you said, I said that anything worth building is worth building right. That shortcuts always cost more in the end than taking the time to do things properly. She was quiet, understanding that this wasn't just a memory I was sharing. I took shortcuts with you, Dad. With us. I stopped measuring twice and started assuming I knew what the result would be. What happens now? I asked. Now I want to learn how to build something that lasts, not just take apart what you've already built. The morning light was streaming through the windows Eleanor had insisted on enlarging when we first moved in. Natural light makes a house feel alive, she'd said. Now, sitting with my daughter in that light, I understood what she meant. Marcus won't be coming back, Rachel said. It wasn't a question. Do you want him to? She considered this for a long time, holding her teacup like it was helping her think. I want him to come back, she said finally, but I think I fell in love with the idea of Marcus, not with Marcus himself. And I think Marcus fell in love with the idea of my inheritance, not with me. That's a hard thing to realize. It's harder to realize how much I started thinking the same way, how much I started seeing you as an asset instead of a person. I reached over and touched her hand. Her skin was soft, like Eleanor's had been, like it had been when she was 8 years old and helping me build birdhouses on Saturday mornings. Rachel, you're not the first person to make that mistake. Money has a way of changing how people see each other. It's why I made the arrangements I made. The trust fund thing, will you ever change it back? I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd felt in months. That depends on you. What do I need to do? Nothing dramatic, nothing that proves you've changed. Just be present, be honest. Be the daughter who used to ask why we needed to measure everything twice. Over the following weeks, something shifted in the house. Rachel started coming home from work and actually talking to me instead of talking around me. She asked about Eleanor, about the business I'd built, about the years before she was born when her mother and I were young and poor and happy in ways that had nothing to do with money. She helped me sort through Eleanor's things, not to get rid of them, but to organize them properly, to preserve what mattered and let go of what didn't. She found the recipe cards, water-stained and yellowed, and asked me to teach her how to make Eleanor's soup. I never learned, she said, standing in the kitchen where her mother had stood for 30 years. I always thought there would be more time. There's time now, I said. Marcus called a few times, trying to negotiate his way back into a situation that no longer existed. Rachel took the calls but kept them short, her voice polite but distant, like she was talking to someone she used to know. He keeps saying he's changed, she told me after one of these conversations. Has he? Number. He's just changed his strategy. 3 months after that morning with the tea, Rachel asked if she could move her things into Eleanor's old sewing room. Not the master bedroom. She understood that belonged to memories she wasn't part of, but the small room where Eleanor had worked on quilts and mended clothes and written letters to friends who lived too far away to visit. I'd like to stay, she said. If you'll have me, not as someone waiting for an inheritance, but as someone who wants to be here while you're here. I looked at my daughter, standing in the doorway of the room where Eleanor had created beautiful things with patience and skill and love, and I saw the 8-year-old who had helped me build birdhouses on Saturday mornings. Yes, I said, I like that very much. 6 months later, we've fallen into routines that feel like family instead of management. Rachel brings me tea every morning in Eleanor's cup. We sit together and talk about small things and large ones, rebuilding trust one conversation at a time. The house is still mine. The keys are still in my pocket. But now, finally, I'm no longer standing alone in the rain, waiting for someone to remember that I belong here. Sometimes the most important doors are the ones you have to close before anyone will open them with respect. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the people who matter most will find their way back to you, not because they have to, but because they want to, because they've remembered what it means to build something that lasts.